The following presentation was recorded at the 2025 Southeast Linuxfest in Charlotte, North Carolina. It is licensed under a Creative Commons license. For more information on the Southeast Linuxfest, visit www.southeastlinuxfest.org. Come join us next June.
All right, everybody. Hope y'all are doing well. Thanks for joining me. My name is Tuxsudo, and today I'm going to do a presentation on sort of two things in combination: degoogling your phone while installing a custom operating system on it called GrapheneOS. And so this one is very near and dear to me. I've been using GrapheneOS for, I think, 3 or 4 years now. And it's kind of grown over a long period of time. It's become quite a stable, reliable operating system. For most people, you can't actually tell the difference from using GrapheneOS from regular Android. So the first point is, why do you want to degoogle? I know the slide has kind of got a lot in it at once, so feel free to take a picture. So most Android phones come with baked-in Google services. These Google services include Play Store, Google Services Framework, and the Google Play services. Some of these services run highly privileged. They have a privileged SE Linux domain, which gives them access to lots of various things on the device, like files, and specifically unique identifiers on the device. So Google services, because they run as a more privileged app than a regular Android app, they have access to your IMEI, your serial number, your IMSI, as well as pretty much any other identifier that would exist on the device. So that allows Google to basically profile that device specifically and know what device it is. And if that device is tied to you, that allows them to tie it to you specifically. Next is, Google uses these services to constantly collect telemetry on your device, even when you aren't using it. Google is an advertising company. They want to know what you're doing, when you're doing it, and whatever you're doing at all times, right? When you're not even using your phone. So these highly privileged Google services are constantly collecting analytics and telemetry on your device at all times, and it's just a waste of battery, and it's kind of just a privacy violation. And the biggest point of not using stock Android is that Google's Android is proprietary, and while you can disable most of the built-in Google apps, you cannot remove them. So even though you can try to disable like Play Store or the Google Photos app on a stock Android device, you're probably going to break some functionality because of how they're integrated and tied to the system itself. So to even begin the discussion of what GrapheneOS is and how it works, we have to look at the Android project as a whole. So Android isn't just something that Google develops as a proprietary software that exists on their own devices. Android starts out as an open source project. It's called AOSP, Android Open Source Project for short. It is the base Android template that basically every other version of Android ultimately uses and builds off of. And so this is what allows other individuals and other groups and projects and even other companies, bigger companies, to utilize Android for their devices. Android is a very open platform. Contrary to iOS, where iOS only exists on iPhones, Android exists on hundreds and hundreds of different OEM devices. And this even allows small groups to create custom versions of Android for specific devices. So several of these examples, we have LineageOS, and then which is a open source version, only open source version of Android that works for a lot of different devices. We have One UI, which is Samsung's version of Android, which is even more disgusting than regular stock Android. And we have GrapheneOS, which is also powered by AOSP. Now, some of these versions of Android also will take part of the features of proprietary Google-ified Android. However, GrapheneOS strictly stays open source only as much as it can with AOSP, while also giving you the power to use some of these Google features if you want to, which I will get into. So to start off, what exactly is GrapheneOS? GrapheneOS is a security-hardened custom version of AOSP, and it adds tons of privacy and security improvements. It does not include any of the invasive Google apps or services by default, but allows you to use Google services if needed using sandbox compatibility layers. So the GrapheneOS team essentially was able to take the Google services. My phone is ringing. 1 second. Do not disturb. There we go. Okay. So, GrapheneOS team, they went out of their way to take a look at the Google services and see how much they could restrict them while allowing them to still run. And it also has a hardened app runtime, hardened libc, malloc, kernel, SE Linux policy. It stays up to date with Android security patches, often releasing them either the day they come out or even before Google releases them themselves for stock Android. And of course, it is open source as possible, as about as possible as AOSP can be. So this is another list of the features. This is not exhaustive, but does go over quite a lot of the features. Like I just mentioned, the hardened app runtime. It has enhanced verified boot. It has network/sensor permission toggles. It has storage scopes, contact scopes. It has sandbox play services and sandboxed Android Auto. It has secure app spawning. It's got Mac randomization. It's got an auditor app to do attestation of the device's integrity with another device that has already been verified. It has custom hardened apps, including a hardened camera app, Vanadium, which is basically a version of Chromium, and a PDF viewer. And it has duress pin. This is a newer feature. It has a duress pin for quick data formatting, and it utilizes MTE or memory tagging extension much more than stock Android does at the moment. And so the first feature I really want to take a look at is the network permission toggle. And so this one is really powerful because this is basically a permission that already exists in Android. It's called the internet permission. It is just not exposed to you as an end user, so you can't actually use it. You can't really change anything about it. However, GrapheneOS takes that base Android permission and it just extends it to the interface and it exposes it to the user. So you basically have the power to tell any app to have no internet access. It works just like a run, similar to the other runtime permissions on every app. And so if you have an app you want to install that maybe you have like this note app you really like, and it doesn't actually need internet access. It's a notes app. You can just go ahead and disable internet access, and that disables local internet access. That disables external internet access, and that prevents it from using any VPN you might have installed. The only thing it can do is do local device network, assuming any other app on the phone is using a local network as well. But it effectively disables external internet access for that app. And I can even show this. Let's see if I can actually show this in play here on my live, sort of live screen share. This is a really great program. It's called Screen Copy. Allows me to take a physical device and show it on the desktop here. So we've got Vanadium here, which is the hardened Google Chrome. Oh, there's a beautiful picture of Tux the penguin. Let's go to, let's just search for Tux here. And as you can see, this app is currently able to use external networks. I'm connecting to duckduckgo.com. And if I want to disable this, I could just swipe up and I could tap on the Chrome icon here. I could tap app info. I could go to permissions. And as you can see, it has these permissions. It has this network permission and sensors permission. Those two permissions are unique well, they're not unique to GrapheneOS, but they're exposed to you as a user in GrapheneOS. So I can go ahead and just disable network, and it's going to force the app to restart to apply that permission. And now when I go to use the app again, and I actually try to search for like Tux again, it's just going to not have internet. So that is really powerful and is very useful for apps that you really need and you really use, but they don't actually require internet. So a really good example of this is the Google Pixel camera app. So unfortunately, the camera app that does come with GrapheneOS, it really sucks. It's not very good. And it has nothing to do with GrapheneOS team themselves. That's just the stock AOSP camera with some enhancements that is released with AOSP. And so using the Pixel camera for me is kind of a must. However, I don't really trust Google that much. I don't want them taking my pictures or taking telemetry for my usage of the Pixel camera app. So I can install the Pixel camera app and I can disable network and I can use it how I want to without the fear of, oh, they might be doing a bunch of analytics while I'm using the camera app. So that is really powerful for those apps that you want to use that only need to run locally, that don't actually need internet. You can just disable it altogether. And then the other one listed on here is also the sensors permission toggle. Now, this one is kind of crazy and surprising knowing about this permission and how it works. So by default, every app on Android gets access to the system's sensors. And that includes things like the accelerometer, the barometer, whatever else could be used to tell where the position of the phone is at. Now, that doesn't include GPS. That is a separate location permission. But sensors are still very useful for fingerprinting you across different apps, because if multiple apps can see the same sensors and the same metrics of sensors at the same time, they can pretty much with high guarantee tell that you're the same person. So GrapheneOS allows you to disable that permission by default. Now, you do have to go into the settings to change that option, which I'll show you here in a second. And once again, it exposes that permission as a permission that you can see as a runtime permission, essentially. So let's go back to the phone screen here. So by default, even on GrapheneOS, just for app compatibility, this sensor's permission is enabled for apps by default. However, I like to go in and change that, and they give the option to do that. So I'm just going to go to settings here, and I'm going to go down to, I believe, I might have actually searched for it. I don't remember what it is. I believe it's in security and privacy. What might be more security and privacy? Yep, there it is. So it's under settings, security and privacy, more security and privacy. So this is toggled on by default. You can disable it though. And it says allow sensor permission to apps by default. I'm just going to turn that off. And now any app I install will no longer have these sensors permission by default. And if they need it, you can go ahead and turn it on later as a runtime permission, just like we saw here with Vanadium. And so next up are some more powerful features. Now, some of these features have sort of made their way into regular Android, but GrapheneOS definitely did these first, and the versions that GrapheneOS came out with are more powerful. So the first one's called storage scopes. So some apps try to get access to all of the files on your phone when they don't actually need that. Now, Android does try to accommodate this a little bit now. So if an app is trying to access photos, it's going to give you a photo picker. However, if you don't want it to have access to all your photos, every time you want to send a new photo through, like, let's say Signal, you got to open that prompt again. Now, what GrapheneOS has is called storage scopes, and this gives you the possibility to give that app access to one entire folder. So let's say you have a Save Photos folder for Signal, and you just want to only have Signal see photos from that folder. Well, you can do just that. And I'll go ahead and show you what this would look like with the Photos, the Google Photos app. Once again, another Google app that I want to use, but I don't want to have access to everything. So normally when you open this app, it's going to try and get access. Well, let me reset it here so it actually requests access to everything. All right, so normally when you open this app, it's going to ask for, okay, I guess it's not this time. That's okay, I'll do it manually. Normally when you open that app, it's going to ask for access to all of your photos and videos. Oh, that's why I have storage scopes on. Let's turn this off. There we go. Let's go back. There we go. So normally when you open an app like Google Photos, you're going to get a prompt like this. So you have few options. One extra option that's unique to GrapheneOS, you have allow limited access. This is a somewhat newer Android feature that allows you to pipe in a specific photo or a specific album to an application. Or you have you've got disallow, you've got allow all, don't allow. And this one's GrapheneOS unique. You've got one that says at the bottom, says set up storage scopes. Now, storage scopes are much more powerful than just allowing limited access, because you can select basically any folder or any file in the whole system. It doesn't have to be specific folders, or it doesn't have to be just a specific album. So I have a folder here that says Google Photos. So I'm just going to select that photo, and I'm going to tap use this folder. I'm going to tap allow. And now Photos thinks it has full access to all of my photos on the device, but really just has access to this one folder. And as you can see, there's just that one file. I had a bunch of other pictures on this profile, but now it just has access to just that Tux the Penguin. So that is really, that is also very useful and very powerful for apps that you need to use, like sending pictures and stuff, but you don't need to have access to everything. Like, this is all about, like, the very base theme of GrapheneOS is reducing permissions as much as possible, because apps usually don't need access to everything at one time, even if they want it. So there are some apps that notoriously have made you give them access to, like, all of your files or all of your pictures in order to use any functionality of that app. But this feature of GrapheneOS tricks the app into thinking it has those permissions already, while only limiting it to a specific scope of files or pictures or folders. And then the same thing goes with contacts. GrapheneOS does the exact same thing. They took the storage scopes feature and basically applied it to contacts. So if I were to set up the Google Contacts app here, it's going to have the same thing. It's going to have allow or don't allow. Now this one's doesn't quite have the same specific button on the bottom. So I will tap don't allow, and then I'm going to edit this app manually. I'm going to edit permissions manually, and I'm going to set up contact scopes myself. Oh, I guess contact scopes isn't showing up in here. Maybe that is not a possibility on a secondary profile. Maybe something with that changed recently and I did not realize it. That should be, I don't know if it's because it's this app specifically or if it's because I'm running on a secondary profile. Let's try one thing real quick. I'll just go ahead and say allow. Oh, Google Contacts is evil. It makes you give it phone access too. Oh well. That is basically works exactly the same as storage scopes. I don't know why it's not showing up this profile. That might be an issue with secondary profiles, which I'll actually get into that a little bit later. But it basically works exactly the same. It allows you to select a specific contact or multiple contacts or contacts that have a tag. And so only those contacts get piped into the app. And so this one is very important and very useful. This is what makes using GrapheneOS much easier over using something like regular LineageOS. So the GrapheneOS team, like I mentioned earlier, they went out of their way to try and sandbox the Google Play services, which typically these Play services require that high privilege access to run at all, but they've managed to get them to work while tricking them into thinking they actually have access to everything they need, whereas they don't. So the reality is, if you are an avid Android user, a lot of apps and a lot of features just require using these Play services, right? Most apps that get notifications use Google Firebase Cloud Messaging, which requires using Play services to receive notifications and to subscribe to those notification channels. And thankfully, you can use Sandbox Play services to add a lot of those features back while also protecting the privacy and some of the security of your system from Play services because of how sandboxed they are. And then part of Sandbox Play services also comes with Android Auto. So there is a sandboxed Android Auto which you can install on GrapheneOS. So if you're someone that likes to use your phone in the car with your car's head unit and it has Android Auto, this is a very helpful feature that allows you to also use that while sandboxing it once again. Now, the sandboxing levels will be different depending on if you used wired or wireless Android Auto. Wired Android Auto will be the most private and the most secure because Android Auto doesn't need access to any of your device serial numbers or MAC addresses with just wired auto. Wireless Auto requires access to at least the device's serial number and the Bluetooth MAC address. So personally, if I'm in a car, I will use wired Android Auto, and it requires very minimal permissions to do that. And another great feature, now this is actually something that's in stock Android now, and iOS has had this for quite a while, which is auto reboot. So this is very important because in the BFU state, which is the before first unlock state, your profile and all its contents is encrypted at rest. And during this state, an adversary can't try to exfiltrate unencrypted data from your phone or do forensics on live memory. So what GrapheneOS added years ago before this was in stock Android was an auto reboot feature. Now this is still customizable in GrapheneOS, whereas you can't really customize this on stock Android. Basically, you can set a specific time in which the phone will automatically reboot if there's been no activity. And no activity means no unlock. So even if somebody's touching the screen and on the lock screen or they turn the phone on and off, that doesn't reset the timer. This timer is effective only for the device being unlocked, which the only unlocking device will reset the timer. So this is very useful if you're in a scenario where you think your phone might be taken from you and you don't want either some criminal or some adversary trying to take data from your phone, like would it be passwords or personal data. You can set your phone to automatically reboot after a certain period of time if it hasn't been unlocked, and that will reset the entire phone back to that data encrypted at rest state with all of your data being encrypted. So that's a very useful security feature, and you can have it set it to like 72 hours. It can be a pretty long time until it actually reboots, or you can set it to very low time, so like 8 hours, right? Which might be useful for you if that might be the special setting that it's not enough so that it does it every day because maybe you sleep for 12 hours, but it's enough so that if you're without your phone for like more than half a day, then it'll go ahead and reboot and you'll be in that more secure state. So in terms of actually installing apps on GrapheneOS, because of the Sandbox Play services, you can use the Google Play Store and you can install apps from the Play Store. But there are some other options that people like to use when using Android more privately. So one of those is a newer app called Crescent, which is a more secure app store. That one is a bit more centralized compared to something like F-Droid, but it has a lot more security features than F-Droid. It's a lot closer to Play Store in terms of security of installing apps. F-Droid's very popular as well, and I recommend the Droidify or Neo Store clients. So F-Droid basically is kind of like a package manager, but for Android. So it kind of takes that. Oops. Well, this thing hates me, doesn't it? There we go. It kind of takes that idea of doing a package manager on Linux where you have certain repositories you can add to the package manager. That's basically how F-Droid works. You can add third-party repositories and you can get apps that way. And so you can get the repositories directly from the app developers. And then another option is Aurora Store. Now, this one is not going to work nearly as reliably as Play Store. Basically, Aurora Store is a proxy for Play Store, allowing you to install apps from the Play Store without having to sign into a Google account. They have a bunch of anonymous accounts that will automatically be signed into that you can use. However, I will mention it's not as secure as installing apps straight from the Play Store, and updates are less reliable. But I do use it myself quite a lot of the time because I don't want to have to sign to my Google account for all of my profiles on my phone. So this one is really, really cool. This is more of a recent feature. This came out last year. You have the option to set a Duras PIN or a Duras password on your phone. And what this does, if you type in the Duras password or PIN anywhere there's a system PIN prompt, it will wipe the phone, basically. That's what it's doing. More specifically, it's going to erase some keys that are used to derive the encryption key. And then it'll immediately reboot the phone to prevent any live memory from being exfiltrated. So if like I or someone else were to put in this duress pin, immediately the phone's going to, effectively the phone's going to be wiped. And let me go ahead and show you a video of this in action. This is just a Pixel 5 here running GrapheneOS. So I'm going to go to the settings, and I'm going to go ahead and set this up. Hopefully it's easy enough to see. Just under security, and then it's under duress password. And so it's going to make you enter your first PIN, and now you're going to set a PIN or a password. I just did 2222. It makes you set both, actually. It makes you set a PIN and a password separately. But you could do the exact same thing if you wanted to. And it gives a warning there telling you that, yeah, this is going to literally make your storage inaccessible once you do the duress PIN. And now it's been set up. So if I lock the device and I go to the lock screen, and then I decide I want to just use the duress PIN, and it's done. It's done. That's it. Reboots the device, and now it's in an inaccessible state. You'll see a nice warning screen come up when you try to boot it next time. You'll still need to reinstall the operating system, but your device's data is inaccessible. Oh, let's skip ahead a little bit. So yeah, this is basically a device trying to boot itself. There we go. So it tries to boot itself a couple times, but it can't. And here's a screen you'll end up on after it tries to boot. Cannot load Android operating system. Your data may be corrupt. And there's an option there to either try and continue or factory data reset. So if you factory data reset, then that's it. It's a new phone. But even before you do the factory data reset manually, your data is already inaccessible completely because it wiped important keys required to get the encryption key for your data in the first place from the secure enclave. So, and if you go ahead and factory data reset, you'll just have basically a clean version of Android or GrapheneOS specifically, and now it's like a new phone. So, to that effect, yes, basically wipes it completely. That's a really cool feature, and it's fun to try out. Just, don't try out accidentally on your main phone, please. But it's fun to do on an extra phone if you just have some time to screw around with it. It's kind of cool to see how quickly it works. So, and that is a newer feature that came out last year. It's very fun. It's very cool. Very, very powerful as well. And so in terms of compatibility, this is an issue that has been around historically, been kind of a problem with GrapheneOS. However, over the past several years, this has become much less of an issue. When GrapheneOS first came out and when I first used it years ago, compatibility wasn't as good, but with the advent of the Sandbox Play services and with lots of updates to GrapheneOS itself, it is quite compatible with almost every Android app you'd want to run. Now, the main caveat here is financial and banking apps, and that has nothing to do with GrapheneOS specifically. That has to do with anti-competitive practices of using things like play integrity, whereas some bank apps will not run unless you've got the proprietary version of Android installed. And that's just something that they decide to opt into. However, a lot of apps, most apps that I use, there's almost no apps that I use that don't work. So like even my banking apps work on GrapheneOS just fine. This URL, this specific link, so the website's just privsec.dev. I probably should have put a QR code up here. Sorry about that. This is a usually kept up to date list of banking apps where you can look at all the banking apps on this list. You can click them and you can see user feedback and see if those users have had issues or if they haven't had issues with those banking apps specifically. And the one thing to note is that if you set up GrapheneOS and you use it as it is by default and an app doesn't work, a good chance is that it will work if you install Sandbox Play services. And then another way to kind of try and layer down making apps work is that you can sort of disable the hardening permissions individually per app. So if there's an app that you really want to work and one of the hardening permissions or one of the security hardening settings is preventing it from working, you can disable that for just that app individually. If it's something that you're okay with doing, once again, it'll warn you that you're basically opening you're making the app a little bit less secure. You're reducing the sandbox a little bit, but I'll show you what that might look like. So let's say Google Photos here was just crashing on boot on GrapheneOS because of all the hardening for whatever reason. I can actually go down here and I can disable hardened memory allocator. I can disable memory tagging. I can disable the extended virtual address space. I can enable native code debugging. And then there's a toggle at the top here that just says exploit protection compatibility mode, which will just disable everything. And it gives you the warning that it'll weaken the exploit protections for the selected app. I can proceed with that, and it disables all these hardening options here. But if you want to, you can just go one by one. And so I've had to do this for some apps. Like some apps need to have the extended virtual address space disabled. Usually it's like financial or banking apps. And then some apps need to have the hardened memory allocator disabled. And then some apps need native code debugging. And if you want to know the specifics of what these each do, they provide all that details on their website. They have quite a lot of thorough documentation on what these features do. So you could try and fit those in with your threat model. If you have a threat model that requires you to not disable any of these, then the app might not work. But if you're okay with disabling one or two of these hardening features, then you can do that individually for every single app on the system, which is very powerful and allows you to have much more greater compatibility with apps that might not typically run on GrapheneOS. And so that brings me into required hardware. So it is ironic that right now Google or GrapheneOS requires a Google Pixel. So to de-Google, you need a Google Pixel, which is kind of funny. But there is very good reasons for this. It is because of the open hardware design. And there's actually, I'll give a disclaimer to this entire slide in just a minute with some potential changes coming forward with how GrapheneOS is going to be released. But as it stands at this moment, and at least a year ago, Google Pixels are the most open device design, and so it allows GrapheneOS to take a Pixel and utilize all the security features of it and all the hardware features of it effectively, and it is kind of designed as the reference device. So Google kind of created the Google Pixel. They wanted to sell the device standalone, but they kind of made it as a reference device for developers who are trying to work with Android. And they made it so that a Pixel, you can load a custom operating system on it while also using custom verified boot keys. A lot of OEMs, most OEMs, don't let you do that. So like Samsung, for instance, you cannot load a custom operating system on a Samsung phone while also using your own verified boot keys. And that's very important for security of the data on the device and security of the booting the operating system. And so the recommended device that you would get for GrapheneOS would be a Pixel 6 or greater. A Pixel 6 is the lowest device you can get that is currently supported on GrapheneOS, while the newest one is being the Pixel 9. Thankfully, if you're in the US, Pixels are very accessible. They're very cheap. You can buy like a used Pixel 8 on eBay for a couple $100s. Just make sure it is fully unlocked and factory unlocked. That is very specific. Make sure it's factory unlocked. Do not buy a carrier model, especially not a Verizon model. I hate Verizon because they do this evil thing where they lock down the bootloader on their phone specifically, unallowing you to install something like GrapheneOS. If you have an AT&T or a T-Mobile model, you might be able to, but I highly recommend just going out of your way to get a factory unlocked model, which will guarantee you have no issues installing GrapheneOS. And if you want to buy one anonymously, right, if the goal of using GrapheneOS and using this is to stay private and not tie the device to you, don't go to like Best Buy and buy one directly with your credit card because they will link your name to the IMEI of that device. If you buy one used, then there's much less chance of that happening, especially if you buy one used on eBay from some individual seller that just happened to be selling a phone. And so usually what I'll do if I want a new device, I'll go and look on like Hardware Swap, which is a subreddit, or I'll look on eBay and find one and I buy it directly from them. But personally, I recommend at least getting a Pixel 8 or higher just because they'll be supported for much longer, the much newer, much better devices. But you can get a Pixel 6 if you want. And those can be had for really cheap, like $100. So how to actually install GrapheneOS. So this might seem like scary to a lot of people, and it is, but it's actually relatively easy. The process to install is very guided, and they have quite a nice and easy installer to use. The main way I would recommend installing is to not actually use your computer, because there's some potentially might have some issues with like drivers or the USB device not being detected properly. You have to install the Android debugging tools on your device in order to use this from your computer. I highly recommend if you have another Android device or if you have a friend that has another Android phone, just flash your Pixel phone from that other device. So you can actually connect these two together with USB-C, and you can actually flash one Pixel from another Android device. It doesn't actually have to be a Pixel, or it doesn't have to be a device with GrapheneOS already. It could just be like a Samsung. And this is the most reliable way to flash. You'll have the least amount of issues. The connection will be the most reliable. You don't have to do anything. You just have to go to the website, and you just have to initiate the actual flashing process. So I highly recommend just using another Android device if you have access to it, and then make sure you're also using the right cable. This is also a very common issue that people run into. I see all the time. They're trying to install GrapheneOS. They have everything else in place correctly, but they're using a crappy cable, or they're using a cable that's really only designed for charging. So I recommend using a high quality cable, or use the OEM cable that came with the phone, assuming it was new. Don't use any of those cheap third-party cables that are included, or any third-party cables you have laying around that are low quality or designed for charging. Make sure it's a high quality cable that's designed for good data transfer. And that way you'll have the fastest install and the most reliable install. Now, when you actually go to GrapheneOS.org, you'll have this installer. I'll actually show you what this looks like if I can pull it up. Let's see. I don't know if I had that pulled up already. See what this might look like. Okay, so let's go to install. So from this page, you'll want to select probably the web USB-based installer. That's recommended for most users, and that'll be the one that'll be the easiest for you. There is a command line installation guide if you want to install it through the command line as well. That one is a lot more difficult and is prone to more error. So I just recommend using the web-based installer, the USB-based installer. And this does require a Chromium-based browser, either on the desktop or on the phone. So if you're on your desktop, you could use something like Brave Browser, like I'm in Brave Browser right now. You can use that to install GrapheneOS, and you can use Brave Browser on an Android device as well. It could be Google Chrome, could be Vanadium. Just has to be Chromium based at the very least. And it has some operating system requirements. So if you're using Windows, it's got to be Windows 10 or 11. Mac OS has to be at least Mac OS 13. In Linux, it has a few specific distros supported, but you could use basically any distro you wanted. You can also do this from Chrome OS or GrapheneOS or Android 12, 13, 14, 15 with Play Protect certification, which will probably be most Android devices that are running a stock operating system. And so if you were to actually do it from your desktop, you'd need to go through some of these instructions and install the Android debugging tools. So the first thing is you have to enable OEM unlocking. And unfortunately, I can't show this directly on this phone because I'm in a secondary profile. I don't have access to that feature. But you have to enable developer options on your Android device, which is going to the settings, then going to about, then tapping on the Android version 10 times. And then that unlocks developer options. And then you can go into developer options and you can enable OEM unlocking, which is required for installing GrapheneOS. And if this option is grayed out, don't fear. You might have to just connect the device to the internet first. This is a common thing that happens with newer devices, is that you'll get a device and it said factory unlock when you bought it from eBay, from the seller, but you get the device and it's kind of grayed out. You might have to connect the device to the internet first, which is unfortunate because you're connecting this insecure Googleified version of the device to the internet. So what you could do is you could go to a public place, connect it to like the Starbucks Wi-Fi, and essentially what it has to do, it just has to do a check with the carrier to make sure it's allowed to actually enable OEM unlocking. I don't know why carriers have this kind of control over devices in the US. It's really weird. But if it's grayed out, just try to do that. And if it still doesn't work, there's a chance maybe they accidentally gave you a Verizon model. And so you should just return the device and try to get another one. But if you can enable OEM unlocking, then at that point, you're good to go. You're guaranteed to be able to install GrapheneOS. And if you were to actually use the web USB installer from either a desktop or the device, basically your instructions would look kind of like this. You would just follow these buttons here. And the first step would be unlocking the bootloader. And it says I have no compatible devices found because I don't have all that stuff set up on here. But if you did it from the actual phone itself, you would get this prompt that would then show you the device. And you would just basically keep selecting that device every time it asks you to. The device would reboot several times. It'll unlock the bootloader. It'll download the release, and then you'll flash the release. And during the flash process, it's going to give you this connection prompt several times. So just keep going through that. And once you do that, you're basically good to go. And the last thing you need to do is just locking the bootloader once again, which will prevent the OS from being reinstalled or a different OS being installed on top of your GrapheneOS installation. And once you've done that, you're basically good to go. And you can use the operating system at that point. So it's actually fairly simple, fairly easy. It's not too difficult. I just recommend following the basic steps if you're running into issues of using a high-quality cable and then trying to do it from a separate Android device so you don't run into issues from the desktop, which can be much less reliable. So in terms of backup and restoring, this unfortunately is not as easy as if you were using stock Android or using an iOS device. Stock Android has the super easy device backup tool that backs up your whole device to your Google account. GrapheneOS has no such thing. It does have a feature, a backup and restore feature that can work, but only if you're coming from a GrapheneOS installation already to a new phone. If you're going from stock Android to GrapheneOS, you're going to have to back up everything manually. So every app that has data and all of your files on the device, all your photos, you're going to want to make sure you back those up. So your contacts, photos, files, app settings, make sure all accounts you have access to already. And you can use some services to make this easier, like you can use Proton Drive, you can use Ente.io, which is a end-to-end encrypted private cloud photo storage app, which is very helpful. You can use your own Nextcloud server. If you're moving from an iPhone, you can use the iCloud website to basically export all the data that's on your iCloud accounts, all your contacts and your photos. And on the topic of the future of GrapheneOS, so this kind of changes the story a little bit in terms of long-term availability of GrapheneOS. So unfortunately, there are some things that Google are doing that really sucks. I hate Google right now. I hate them anyway. they are currently under some antitrust lawsuits. Like, they have a lot of antitrust lawsuits that have been thrown at them over the past several years, and the DOJ is kind of forcing them to split up several parts of the company. And so Google's doing some really weird things. Typically, Google releases AOSP-specific device trees for the Pixel devices. And this allows, once again, developers to easily integrate and test to see how Android would work on like the Pixel specifically. However, recently Google has made them proprietary. They have made them closed, not necessarily proprietary, but they made them closed source. So the Pixel specific device trees are not available for Android 16, which is something that GrapheneOS utilizes and they heavily use to port newer versions of Android to GrapheneOS. And this does not mean it's impossible for them to update GrapheneOS or utilize newer Pixel devices. However, this creates a tremendous amount of more effort and work for them, which is why Android 16 is not out yet for GrapheneOS, or else it probably would have been by now. And it does bring into question the future of GrapheneOS on Pixel devices as a whole. They're going to try to support the current selection of Pixel devices for as long as they possibly can, and there'll probably be a good chance they will be able to for quite a long time. However, it does bring into question if they will be able to port GrapheneOS easily enough to newer Pixel devices, and if newer Pixel devices will have the requirements that GrapheneOS set for GrapheneOS as an operating system. And so I don't want to dissuade you from buying a Pixel right now and installing GrapheneOS. I just want to put this out as, okay, there might be some changes in the future. If you do buy a Pixel today, there's a high chance that you'll be able to update that for several years, for several Android versions. There's just a chance that newer Pixel devices might not actually have GrapheneOS. And so they are looking into talking to potentially some OEMs to create a custom device designed specifically for GrapheneOS. However, this will be more of a long-term plan to try and get off reliance of Google hardware-wise, and will require millions of dollars and will be a big effort. But that's something that they're already starting to look into long-term. But if you do want to use GrapheneOS, I highly recommend still just going out and getting a Pixel. The cost of entry, especially in the US, is so low. You can buy a reasonably good Pixel for a couple $100. And this is just something Google is unfortunately doing right now. They're making AOSP harder to use with Pixels. And why they're doing this, I don't really know. If you take a look at GrapheneOS on their X account and you follow them, they post about this quite frequently. They have long threads explaining what's going on. And some of it's quite interesting. Google might be trying to protect certain parts of the company. It looks like Google themselves might try to keep the Pixel branch while also separating Android from it, which is going to make things a lot more complicated. So to boil it down, TLDR, Pixels are looking a little bit potentially not supported in the future for newer Pixel devices for GrapheneOS. But existing ones should still be supported for quite a while. It just requires a lot of extra work on their end, which means getting newer OS versions will take a little more time, unfortunately. However, they're working really hard to get Android 16 working with GrapheneOS on Pixel devices, and they already are going ahead and backporting some of the security patches from Android 16 to Android 15 to try and keep the devices as secure as possible. And thank you. So I have, if you want, you can follow me on X at tuxpizza, and I have a website that is tux.pizza. I haven't posted a blog post there in probably over a year. I probably should. I host some privacy services, and I work for Cake Wallet as well. We sponsored this conference, and we are an open source non-custodial crypto wallet that works on Android, iOS, as well as Linux on the desktop. So thank you, and I guess we can go into questions.
Hey, you mentioned that it was better to use Pixel 6 and above. I have a Pixel 3 laughing at me somewhere. So why not lower than that, or what the expected caveats of using an older phone?
Well, you can, if you wanted to try GrapheneOS, you could definitely install it on that Pixel 3. You're going to have to go out of your way to find an older device image, though, because the Pixel 3 has not been supported for years. And GrapheneOS tries to make sure that they're only sticking to devices that are officially supported. They don't want to support a device with the operating system if it's not officially supported by the OEMs and the vendors. And the Pixel 3 was a Qualcomm device, and Qualcomm historically hasn't supported their devices for very long in terms of like patches and like firmware updates. And so GrapheneOS will drop support for devices when the OEM drops official support for them as well. And also the Pixel 3 hasn't been supported by Google for several years. So you can try GrapheneOS if you want. You're just going to be on a very old version and you're not going to be able to get security updates. So I would highly recommend or unrecommend using it as a primary device at all. And another reason for the Pixel 6 being the requirement is simply because that is the first device that came with Google's custom chipset, the Tensor series chips. And those ones Google has much over control over for actually supporting for a much longer period of time. And the Pixel 6 still has several years of security updates and Android versions. But however, if you want to have a phone for a really long time, like some people like to have their phones for 4 or 5 years, you can totally do that if you get a newer device like a Pixel 8 or a Pixel 9.
The current Pixels are HTC, aren't they?
No, they're still designed by Google.
You had mentioned earlier that cutting down on the excessive bloat that Google puts into its applications causes more battery life, or it uses more resource utilization, right? Do you have any statistics on how much better performance you're going to get out of your battery if you switch over to graphene?
Ooh, that's actually a good one. I don't have any statistics myself because I do actually use some of the Sandbox Play services, and I basically came directly from a totally unrelated device. So I haven't done a test side by side of the same phone with stock Android and GrapheneOS, but I know there are some people who have, and they have shown that it does actually give them quite decent more battery life. It does give them quite a lot more time on the phone. And it's not dramatic if you're using Play services as well, like Sandbox Play services, because Sandbox Play services will still keep those sockets open for receiving notifications. But even then, if you are using Play services, I believe you still do have a decent benefit in terms of battery life. But if you're using GrapheneOS like bare bones as is without installing Sandbox Play, you'll definitely have very good battery life compared to using stock Android, which has all the those background services and everything going on. So.
You had briefly mentioned profiles on GrapheneOS. I briefly used it, and I tried to use it probably in the incorrect way. So I was curious if you had any recommendations for that, and then notifications without Play services.
Yeah, so there's this feature on Android, which is standard to most versions of Android. You can actually create a secondary profile. So if I'll show you in the main profile on my phone here. So I'm actually in a secondary profile right now, so I can't actually show you the profile manager UI actually, or can I? Okay, yeah. So this is actually a standard Android feature that is exposed to not all operating systems. Like Samsung historically has disabled your ability to use this. This is available in stock Android. And GrapheneOS basically takes this feature and they extend it. So what GrapheneOS does, they allow you to use, I think, up to 64 profiles instead of the base, what is it? It's like 8 to 16, which is the base amount you can do. And GrapheneOS extends it to being able to use a lot more, which is probably overkill. I don't imagine anyone's using 64 profiles on their phone. But if you want to, you really can. And GrapheneOS also allows you to control more individual features of the profiles themselves. So I'm in a secondary user right now, so I don't actually have control of those specific features. But if I were in the owner profile right now, I would see several other options here. So I can control other profiles' ability to run apps in the background. So I can disable background app usage for other profiles. I can easily install apps in that secondary profile from the main profile by just turning them on and off. And I can disallow, I can allow phone usage and message usage. So there's a bit more control that GrapheneOS gives you of those profiles. Now, personally, how I use profiles, I actually don't use secondary profiles for the most part. On Android, I'll try to break it down with profile types because it does get a little bit confusing. So on Android, you have two different main profile types. You have owner profiles, which is the first profile you set up on the phone, and then you have secondary profiles. So the owner profile can use this feature called the work profile, which is basically like a secondary list of apps in the app launcher that are all isolated from the main one. And you can enable this work profile via specific apps like Shelter. This was designed to use for basically work purposes. So some IT person can set up the work profile on the device, so you can have a separated container for all your work apps from your main apps. But I use this myself just to separate like personal apps from other personal apps. And you also have this newer feature on Android called private space. And I don't know, I think I can actually enable this secondary profile. Let's see. Yes, I can. So Android 15 came with this new feature called private space, which is really cool. It's similar to the work profile, but it's more exposed to the user. And it essentially is a second pocket of apps within the profile. Now, this one actually works on secondary profiles on GrapheneOS. GrapheneOS enabled the private space for secondary profiles. The work profile only works on the owner profile. So a good example of how this could work is you could be using a single profile on GrapheneOS, a single base profile, and you could have all your personal apps inside this first part. And if I'll turn on private space here, it'll actually give you basically a second list of apps inside there, which are isolated from the main one. So I'll go ahead and set this up real quick. Let's use the screen lock here. And we're done. So now if I scroll down on the apps launcher, you've got this thing down here that says private. I'm going to tap that, and it's going to make me put in my PIN or my fingerprint. And now I've got this second, basically this container of apps here. These are all isolated from the rest of the ones at the top here. So this is a really easy way to kind of create little sandboxes of apps within the same profile without having to use the main profiles feature for everything, because you can use this for like separating apps if you want to. However, switching between profiles can be kind of annoying. So using something like private space is a very good way to kind of mimic that behavior, but within the same profile. It makes it a lot more easy to use. So that's kind of what I do personally. I use the owner profile, I enabled work profile and private space. So I effectively have 3 different pockets of apps in the same profile, which is really powerful.
Is Linux exposed more than under standard stock Android, or can you run Linux apps?
So it is for the most part just standard Android in terms of like features and functionality. There is a newer feature in Android though that actually is like Google's working on, and it's called. Actually, I can't see this profile. I guess that's what I get for setting this up with a secondary profile. So there actually is a feature that Google's working on that allows you to run Linux VMs on Android directly. And it does work. It's in like a very early beta state right now. And in the future, it's going to be used to provide further sandboxing to apps. And GrapheneOS wants to utilize this to actually allow you to run Linux apps directly on the phone. I don't know exactly what that would look like yet, but that is definitely something that is actually being talked about and possibly worked on. And right now, if you have a phone with GrapheneOS, you can actually turn on this experimental Linux support, and you can run GNOME in a virtual machine. Now, it's very slow, and the experience is terrible, but you can actually try that out if you want to natively on the device, it's kind of a cool thing to check out.
Do you have access to your Google Wallet or any sort of similar payment service within Graphene?
That is a good question. So one of the downsides, like GrapheneOS compatibility is amazing. One of the things that you can't use, one of the very few things you can't use is tap to pay, right? So you can use Google Wallet for your passes normally. So if you use flight apps and you like having those flight apps have your boarding passes in Google Wallet, you can do that. However, you can't use tap to pay. So the feature where you have a credit card in your Google Wallet and you tap to pay, you can't use that. But I imagine most people, if you're trying to switch to GrapheneOS to become more private, you probably wouldn't use Google tap to pay anyway. But that is a feature that you can't use, unfortunately. So.
How apparent is like logging for the apps for like you can disable things like the sensors and individual permissions. In past experiences, I've had apps that kind of crash with very little information or kind of, don't really tell you why they crashed. Is the logging kind of verbose in a sense that you can, I guess, identify like what causes like app crashes, things like that?
Yeah, so I don't believe that it's more verbose than it is on stock Android, but yet another feature of GrapheneOS, which I'll bring up because of that question, you can actually view the logs of an app inside GrapheneOS itself without having to connect your phone through ADB. So if I go to, like, let's say I want to see what the Photos app is doing specifically, I'll just tap and hold on it. I'll tap app info. Then I'll scroll down and I'll go ahead and tap on view logs. And I basically have a log viewer right here. It's like doing this from ADB, but it's directly on the app itself. And so I can actually change how verbose this is with the log level. By default, it's on verbose. So for your question specifically, I don't know if GrapheneOS is more verbose than stock Android, but at the very least, you have a really cool log viewer inside the phone you can see for every app, which is really awesome. And that's very useful for just that troubleshooting app sometimes. All right, I think that's it. Thanks, guys. Oh, I think I have one person right there, actually.
Yeah, so I used Graphene for a few years. It's awesome. I ran into issues with like a Find Friends app and then mapping. Like I used open source. Invariably, I ended up on Google Maps anyway and running Google services. So like, is it, what's your take on that stuff?
Like just in terms of like using Google Apps on GrapheneOS in terms of
Yeah,
your
I mean, are you defeating the purpose if you're like running Google Maps with services?
I would say you're not. Even if you are using like, let's say you have two phones. One has stock Android, one has GrapheneOS with all the same Google apps and Sandbox Play services, but it's GrapheneOS. You are still at a much greater advantage, and I would say it's not necessarily defeating the purpose or the point, because Sandbox Play services is well just that. It's much more sandbox than Android. So Google doesn't have this low-level device or access to, or this higher level access to your device like it would normally in stock Android, and it allows you to use Google services in a much more private way. And a great way to do this is kind of what I do as well. I utilize multiple of these profile features, so like private space and work profile. My base profile has no Sandbox Play services or no Google services that have internet access. I have some Google apps that have no internet access. For apps that I want to actually receive notifications, I have Google Play, I have Sandbox Play services installed on private space with internet enabled, and I have just a few apps like Slack that I need to get notifications on there. So I would say no, it's not pointless, and you can kind of like organize it and sandbox things how you want, which is something that you definitely can't do to the same degree on stock Android. On stock Android, any of these side profiles you would have, like private space, automatically has the same Play services. But on GrapheneOS, you can choose to install Play services or just not do it at all. So I have the option here in the private space. I can install Google Play Store, which will also install the GMS Compact Config and Google Play services. So you can kind of separate out how that is. But I would say it's not pointless because even if you are using Google services and you are using Google apps, they're still much more heavily sandboxed than they are in stock Android, and it'll be a much more secure experience as well.
Thanks.
So I know you mentioned you can install Graphene bare bones without Sandbox Google Play services. If you wanted to keep it a little more on like the FOSS side and sandboxed or not, you didn't want the Google Play services, but you wanted maybe instead of like nothing working ever, you wanted like occasionally an app to sometimes work. Have you ever tried Micro G? Does that play well with the ecosystem?
I've used MicroG in the past. It's not compatible with GrapheneOS unless you were to build a custom version of GrapheneOS. Then you could use MicroG. I think they decided not to use MicroG due to the fact that it's sort of a weird custom implementation of using like the Google APIs, and it also runs privileged. They decided to go the route of using the official Play services for maximum compatibility and security, but then sandboxing it. So you get the advantage of using the current up-to-date version of Play services, but it's heavily sandboxed.
All right, thanks.
We are about out of time, but it is running into lunch, so it's okay.
Hey, thanks for your presentation. I think this is awesome, and Graphene's a big step up over stock operating systems. When the AEX project ended in 2022, I evaluated Graphene, and some of my concerns were it seemed like it was maintained by a single person who was fairly aggressive with his community, and especially when they asked for like root access to their own devices. I was just curious, like, what's the current state of the project? Or is there more than one maintainer, and how's it going?
Yeah, definitely. They definitely have a team of people now. Yeah, I know the original creator of the project has definitely ruffled a lot of feathers. But there is a team of people. There are several people that work on the project. Unfortunately, one of those individuals recently was forcefully conscripted into the military, and so they actually lost one of their top guys recently, who would have helped do the Android 16 port. But there are several people now. I don't know exactly how many they are. I think they remain pretty private because of the type of stuff they're working on. But the project's in a fairly good place in terms of development. The main issue that came up, the main hump, is the Google screwing with their AOSP device trees. So, but yeah, it's not just him. There are several people. If that answers that question. All right, I think that's it. Thanks, guys.